Anyway, I'm going live now, so I'll see you, okay?
Oh, all right. Sorry, Paul. All right, then have yourself a great day anyway. Get out of it.
You too. Bye-bye. Salam alaikum. Welcome to today's Friday Reflections on this Friday, the 12th of August, 2022. I hope you are well and doing good wherever you are. Looking forward to the weekend. In the UK at the moment, we are having a lot of absolutely splendid sunshine. It is causing a bit of a problem with water supplies, but at least we can enjoy some beautiful sunshine. It's wonderful at the moment, and it's not at all typical British weather, but really nice. Reminds me of when I was in California. It is really very different from typical weather, but alhamdulillah. Anyway, today I wanted to continue reading from the Book of Knowledge, which is from Ihya Ulum by the great Imam Al-Ghazali. And we read about the obligatory things upon individual Muslims last week, the Fard Ayn. And this week, we're going to discuss the things which are an obligation upon not every individual Muslim, but they are an obligation upon the community of Muslims. So there are things, for instance, which the community needs to know. You need to have experts in the community who are able to, for instance, they're good with medicine or they're good with certain sciences. Not every person needs to have knowledge in those areas, but you do need it within the whole of the community. Some of these things are more specific to Muslims. Some of them are universal that within all societies you need, such as I just mentioned, medicine. So this week we're going to discuss knowledge that the acquisition of which is deemed Fard Kifayah, which is obligatory upon the community as a whole, but not upon every individual. And this is taken from the Book of Knowledge, translated by Nabih Amin Faris, which comes from the Ihya Ulum. This translation is from 1988. So apologies if it's not the most up-to-date English, but it's still very good. So Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It should be known that a necessary duty is not distinguished from other duties except when the different sciences are enumerated. These are divided in relation to the kind of duties we are now considering into sacred and profane sciences. By sacred sciences, I mean those which have been acquired from the prophets and are not arrived at through reason, like arithmetic, or by experimentation, like medicine, or by hearing, like language. Profane sciences are divided into praiseworthy, blameworthy, and permissible. Praiseworthy sciences are those on whose knowledge the activities of this life depend, such as medicine and arithmetic. They are divided into sciences, the acquisition of the knowledge of which is Fard Kifayah, and into sciences, the acquisition of the knowledge of which is meritorious, though not obligatory. Sciences whose knowledge is deemed Fard Kifayah comprise every science which is indispensable for the welfare of this world, such as medicine, which is necessary for the life and body, arithmetic for daily transactions. I mean, you can't do anything without arithmetic. I mean, it comes into business, it comes into all the other sciences. Even calculating your zakat, you need arithmetic. And the division of legacies and inheritances, as well as others besides. These are the sciences which, because of their absence, a community would be reduced to narrow straits. So if you didn't have people within the society who knew these sciences, then your society would go backwards in a very big way. They're really that essential. But should one who can practice them rise in that community, it would suffice, and the obligation to require their knowledge would cease to be binding upon the rest of the community. Although, of course, it would need someone to learn from that person or go to school to take over that role within a certain number of years, because no one lives forever. So we always have to be considerate as to how we pass on these knowledge and sciences to the future generations. No one should be astonished when we say that medicine as well as arithmetic are of the sciences which are fard kifayah, because the fundamental industries are also the same, such as agriculture, weaving, politics, even copying and tailoring. For should a town lack a copper, extinction would overtake its people. Okay, a copper, it's a type of medicine that was practiced within the Middle East and for many centuries. It's less common today, although there are still people who practice cupping. But the point is, if a community lacks a doctor in the modern sense, a GP, then it will create a lot of problems. I mean, who do you go to if you become ill? How many people would die as a result of a lack of a doctor within that community? And this is what Imam Al-Ghazali is referring to here. In the past, you know, they didn't have GPs in the same way that we do, but they had people who performed the same role. Has not he who has sent down the malady also sent down the remedy, given guidance for its use, and prepared the means for administering it? It is not, therefore, permissible to expose oneself to destruction by neglecting its remedy. To go deep into the details of arithmetic and the nature of medicine, as well as the details which, while not indispensable, are helpful in reinforcing the efficacy of whatever is necessary, however, considered meritorious, not obligatory. So saying it doesn't always need that the person needs to go into the deepest depths of these sciences, but they have to have a good working knowledge. But obviously, the more which they understand, the more of an expert they are within these fields, then the more beneficial they are going to be to their community. The blameworthy sciences are magic, talismanic science, juggling, trickery, and the like. These sacred sciences, which are intended in this study, are all praiseworthy. Sometimes, however, they may be confused with what may be taken for praiseworthy, but in fact are blameworthy. And for this reason, sacred sciences are divided into praiseworthy and blameworthy sciences. The praiseworthy sciences comprise sources, usul, branches, and auxiliary and supplementary. There are therefore four kinds. First come the sources, which are four in number: the Book of God, the Quran, the usage, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the agreement, the Ijma of all Muslims, and the traditions relating to the companions, Athar of Sahaba. Agreement, insofar as it evinces usage, is a source. Like traditions relating to the companions, however, which also evince usage, agreement is a secondary source. This is because the companions have witnessed the revelations and have, through their close association with the Prophet ﷺ, comprehended what others have failed to see. Since, however, it is possible that words will not fully express what has been so comprehended, the learned men have deemed it fit to follow the example of the companions and hold fast to their traditions, though on certain condition and in a special manner, as one concerned may see. It is, however, not appropriate to discuss in this section. So this is distinguishing between the sources, the religious sources upon which we get knowledge. So you've got the Quran, which is the primary source, and the Sunnah, the agreement, the ijma of all the Muslims, and traditions that relate back to the companions. And that's important because there are some things which maybe if you look at the Quran or directly to the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, you've got some information, but then you've got more information that comes from how the companions lived and interpreted and followed these traditions. Now, we should also take that into account because, of course, the Sahaba Ikram were the people who were closest to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So how they actually interpreted and lived is also important to consider, and how they actually understood things. Imam Al-Ghazali continues to say, second are the branches, furu. They are not what has been drawn from the sources, usul, not connected to the literal meaning, but through meanings which are adduced by the mind, thereby widening the understanding until a meaning differing from the literal is indicated. As is, for example, indicated by the words of the Prophet ﷺ, the judge should not sit in a judgment while angry. Namely, he should not sit in judgment while constipated or hungry or suffering from a painful disease. This last thing may be of two kinds. The first pertains to the activities of this world and is contained in the books of law and entrusted to the lawyers, the learned men of this world. Pardon me. The second pertains to the activities of the hereafter. It is the science of the conditions of the heart, its praiseworthy and blameworthy characteristics, what is acceptable before God and what is reprehensible to him. All these are treated in the last part of this book. That's the last part of the Ihya Ulum. It includes the knowledge of what issues from the heart and affects the senses in their acts of worship and usages of life, all of which are treated in the first part of this book. Third are the auxiliary, the muqaddimat. These act as the instruments for the sacred sciences. Thus, linguistic science and syntax are but instruments for the knowledge of the Book of God and the use and the Sunnah of these prophets. In themselves, linguistic science and syntax are not of the sacred sciences, but it has become necessary to engage in their study because of the law, since this law has come in the language of the Arabs. And whereas every law, a religious law, is revealed through the medium of particular language, the learning of that language becomes an instrument wherewith to learn the law. Among these instruments is also the science of writing. It is, however, not a necessary instrument because the Apostle of God was himself unlettered, ummi. And if it were conceivable that retention of whatever is heard was at all possible, man might have dispensed with writing. But because of the impossibility of such a thing, it has become, on a whole, necessary. Interesting reflection there, that if we could have just recorded everything audibly, then we wouldn't have needed writing. Imam Al-Ghazali made that reflection in his book, but from his perspective at the time, because of the impossibility of such a thing, it's become necessary to study language and syntax and the use of language. Although even if things were recorded, it's still you still have syntax and the use of language, the use of words. It's important to understand what a word means. I mean, a good example in the English language and European languages is if you say the word video. If you go back to ancient Greece and you say the word video, it just means to see, to see. But if you use the word video in English, it means a moving recording, a picture that is moving, and the recording of that, which is quite a different meaning. It doesn't mean literally just to see. It has a very specialized meaning in English. Of course, we borrowed the word from ancient Greek and used it for that meaning in modern English. And there are many words like that, words which change meaning. Sometimes they are borrowed from other languages, such as the word video. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're the same word within the language that has a meaning before and after something happened. A good example of this is the word Islam itself. Today, Islam is understood by many people to be a religion, an organized religion. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the word Islam in the Quran and said, today he has perfected deen for us, a way of life, and made that for us Islam, there wasn't an organized religion. It didn't exist at that time that revelation came to the Prophet ﷺ. Even the time it was written down in the Quran, Islam was not organized as it is now. It was referring to a state of being. And now, of course, we understand Islam as being an organized religion. So what is it? Is it a state of being or an organized religion? Or both? I mean, I would argue it's both. But we shouldn't forget the original meaning as well, because otherwise we will drift away from understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant within the Holy Quran. So words change meaning, even within a language. And this is why Imam Al-Ghazali in this book is saying it's very important to study this and to understand. At least some people within the society need to understand language quite well and deeply and be able to point things out and correct things when they're misunderstood. And fourth, Imam Al-Ghazali continues about these different sources. Fourth are the supplementary sources, which in relation to the science of the Quran are divided into what pertains to pronunciations, such as the learning of the different readings and the enunciation of the different letters, and into what pertains to the exposition, which also rests on authoritative transmission. So, and this is very specialized knowledge, and it's not essential for everybody to understand. But that doesn't mean it's not valuable. This is because language alone cannot treat the exposition or its technicalities, such as the knowledge of abrogating and the abrogated and the general and the particular and the express laws of the Quran, as well as the manifest meaning. And finally, the matter of the application, i.e. the science, which is called the principles of jurisprudence, usul al-fiqh, which also includes sunnah. And this is why we need scholars. And unfortunately today, a lot of the people who present as ulama are not necessarily, up to the standard we would expect ulama to be. And I include myself within that. I do include myself within that, although, I have seen people that they have positions and roles, and I've had conversations with them and been dissatisfied with what we've discussed and how they've understood certain things. And their openness to understanding things in ways which need to be understood in order to resolve misunderstandings and issues which we confront on a day-to-day basis today. So, someone asked me today, am I a scholar? Well, I'm fulfilling the role of that. But when I look at scholarship, I'm looking at people like Imam Al-Ghazali. And what's my scholarship compared to Imam Al-Ghazali? this is the state of scholarship within Muslim communities today. And I remember even Sheikh Hamza Youssef, who is quite brilliant scholar of the present time. When he was asked this some years ago, he also said that when people ask me, am I a scholar, I don't know how to answer, because I look at the scholars of the past, people who knew many different sciences, not just religious sciences, but other sciences such as, you know, physics and biology and other things. And how can I compare to them? They were polymaths. Are we polymaths today? Polymaths are people that are professors or experts within multiple fields of knowledge. Now, I aspire to this, and I'm always reading, studying, listening to knowledgeable people that I can benefit from. But how far I would rate myself compared to them, I'm still working on. And I think that anybody who's honest would have to admit the same. But this is the thing. We really have very high standards of scholarship within Islam. And also the point here is that it's important to have people within the community who are genuine scholars and understand the religion and understand the other scientific disciplines, at least to a reasonably good level. And you need to have a significant number of people within the community who can understand that, so that this deen can be properly followed and properly understood. And when issues arise, that you have the people with the skills and the ability to be able to resolve those issues in a way which is most suitable for the particular situation, and is also within deen, and it's not, you know, doing anything which brings people out of the deen or causes any sin to be upon anybody that is avoidable. It is possible to do that if you have, you know, properly educated scholars. But today, many Muslims don't even put the value on scholarship, what it should be put on it, and don't realize that scholars need to be proficient in a number of different fields, and not simply, you know, some of the classical things like how to read Quran, or, you know, some basic fiqh. But you can't resolve many things if you only have that limited knowledge and understanding of the deen. I've sat with many scholars and learned what I can, and also people within, you know, the secular sciences, and learn what I can. But you know, to really attain that level that is needed to be proficient, it takes a lot of work. And I can understand why this puts people off, but it is also, it's vitally important for our society and for us to be able to move forward, and for us to be able to get things right as a community. It's not something which is obligatory upon everybody within the community, because not everybody has the capacity for it. And I don't mean that offensively. You know, somebody could be an absolutely brilliant carpenter, or, you know, a brilliant car mechanic, and they are brilliant within their field, and you need people in these roles. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you could, obviously you can't go to them for other fields of knowledge unless they've learned that too. People have different capacities, and we shouldn't look down upon anybody if they specialize in another area, because society needs all sorts of people. But we do need people who are genuinely scholarly in their understanding of Islam and various different disciplines. Imam Al-Ghazali continues and says, in connection with tradition and history, the supplementary sciences are biography, dealing mainly with the lives of illustrious men and of the companions, knowledge of the trustworthy transmitters of traditions and their peculiarities, in order to distinguish between the weak, daif, and strong traditions, and of their ages, in order to differentiate between those traditions whose chain of authorities is incomplete or lacking, and those whose chain of authorities goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, as well as a knowledge of whatever is connected with it. These then are the sacred sciences. Not only are they all praiseworthy, but they also belong to the category of fard kifayah. But should one inquire, saying, why have you appended jurisprudence to the secular sciences and grouped jurisprudence among secular scholars? Let me tell you that God made Adam from earth and his offspring from clay and running water. He brought them out from his loins to womb, then to life, and finally to the grave. From the grave, he raised them to judgment, and from there to paradise or to hellfire. Such was therefore their beginning, such was their end, and such is their abodes. Furthermore, God has created this world in preparation for the hereafter, in order to gather suitable provisions therefrom. If these provisions were gathered justly, dissensions would have ceased, and the jurisprudence would have become idle. So the point here he's making is, if people had good hearts and were living right in the first place, you wouldn't need jurisprudence to be able to resolve many of these issues. The reality is, because human beings are sinful and make mistakes. This is why you need jurisprudence. And he's using this as an explanation as to why he's put jurisprudence, he's grouped it with the secular sciences, as opposed to the sacred. But since men have with greed gathered their provisions, dissensions ensued, and consequently the need for a magistrate to rule them arose. In turn, the magistrate felt the need for a canon with which to govern the people. It is the jurisprudent, though, who has the knowledge of the rules of government and the methods of mediation between people whenever, because of their greed, they contend. So he becomes the teacher of the magistrates and their guide in government and control, that through their righteousness the affairs of men in this world may be set in order. Upon my life, I declare that jurisprudence is also connected with religion, not directly but indirectly, to the affairs of this world, because this world is the preparation for the hereafter, and there is no religion without it. Furthermore, the state and religion are twins. Religion is the foundation, while the state is the guard. That which has no foundation will certainly crumble, and that which has no guard is lost. Without the magistrates, there is neither government nor control, and the correct way to settle dissensions is through law. So here, Imam Al-Ghazali is saying that although religion is the way to paradise, religion also needs to be within a state which protects its right to exist, its right to be practiced. Without that protection, religion will fall down. And as a part of that, you also need, obviously law. You have to have proper systems in place so that people are protected and people can go about their lives, and you can have justice. So you can't have government without this system in place. And as governments by magistrates does not belong primarily to the science of religion, but is an adjunct that without which there is no religion, so is the knowledge of the manner of government. So it is well known that it is not possible to carry out the pilgrimage without the protection of an escort of Bedouins along the route. But the pilgrimage itself is one thing, setting out the road to pilgrimage is another. Policing the route without which it is not possible to perform the pilgrimage is still another. And the knowledge of the matter of policing the route with all the rules and regulations is again another. The result of jurisprudence is knowledge of the methods of government and control. This is attested by a tradition whose chain of authorities goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, namely, people will not be judged except by three: a governor, a deputy, and an intruder. The governor is the Imam, The Imams have always been the judges. The deputy is his lieutenant, while anyone else is an intruder who undertakes that responsibility without there being any need for him to do so. As a matter of fact, it was the custom of the companions to avoid giving legal opinions to the extent that each was in the habit of referring the question to his colleague, although they did not avoid answering questions relative to the science of the Quran and the path of the hereafter. In some recensions, the word hypocrite appears instead of the word intruder, and rightly so, because anyone who, without any special need, undertakes the responsibility of giving legal opinions does so for the sake of acquiring position and wealth. And this is a very, very serious point. And this is why it's important to read books like this and understand what the Islam actually says. Today, how many people do you know, how many people who are more maybe scholars of the Quran or spirituality, and they're giving legal opinions within the Sharia? That within a Muslim country where this is the law of the land, they're giving a legal opinion, but they're not qualified to do so. I myself generally avoid doing this except on very serious matters. Why? Because it's a big responsibility. Even when you have the knowledge to do so, as many of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad would have been better placed to make legal rulings, legal opinions, than many Muslims today, even among the scholars. And yet the companions of the Prophet Muhammad generally avoided doing so unless they really had to. I want you to think about that for a moment. And think about all of these scholars who you would have listened to on YouTube, on the internet, or even in mosques or various gatherings, who are very quick to issue fatwa. Very quick. Or things which, even if they don't call it a fatwa, amount to a fatwa because they are matters of jurisprudence, of fiqh, of sharia. And they're very quick to say, and then say that if people don't do this, they're not Muslim or they're out of Islam. How many people have you listened to who said that? Yet Imam Al-Ghazali points out here that the companions of the Prophet Muhammad avoided behaving like that. If it was a matter of the Quran, a matter of spirituality, they would be quick to answer it. But when it comes to legal, they generally avoided it unless they really had to do it. And as an advice to anybody who's listening to this, avoid it unless you really are in a position where you need to do it. I myself, running a Muslim organization in the United Kingdom and doing things also internationally, I have been in situations where I've had to assign on to a fatwa. I don't usually do it by myself. I get other colleagues who are even better qualified than me to actually write stuff. But I have signed it. I have and put stuff out there only on occasion. I don't make a habit of it. And you can go through, all of my posts, all of my broadcasts. How many times have you seen me issue fatwa? Or anything which, sometimes people don't call it a fatwa, but it amounts to a fatwa because it is a legal opinion. This is what a fatwa is within fiqh. I generally avoid it. It's something we have to be careful of. Oftentimes you don't need that. Oftentimes you just need a little bit of wisdom to apply to a situation. You don't need a fatwa. And I'm happy to share that. I'm happy to share insights. But issuing fatwa, it's serious. You have to know what you're doing and how you issue fatwa as well. You can issue fatwa in ways which are harsh and leave no room for maneuver. And you can issue fatwa which actually are more compassionate and understanding and take into account the circumstances. There's different ways of going about things. I mean, if you look at the fatwa, many of the fatwa that have been issued by Al-Azhar over the years compared to fatwa issued by other authorities, you'll see what I mean. But be careful of people who are very quick to issue fatwa, opinions on jurisprudence, and understand there are different sciences within Islam. You can be someone who's specialized in understanding the Quran, but not someone who understands fiqh very well. You can be someone who understands jurisprudence very well, but not necessarily understands, the science of understanding the Quran as well, because your specialization is different. A lot of people who are specialized in jurisprudence are not specialized in spirituality, and vice versa. Now, we should, if we specialize in either of these areas, have some understanding of the other, because it balances us. This is an advice that's been given by many scholars for generations. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be specialists in that area. I'm much more specialist in spirituality than I am in jurisprudence, but I still need to have some working understanding of jurisprudence because of what I do. And if you don't, then you lose balance. And Islam is a balance between these different aspects. Anyway, going back to the book. So I know Imam Al-Ghazali warns that people who are very quick to issue fatwa are often doing so for the sake of acquiring position and wealth. How true is that? He wrote this a very long time ago, but it still holds true today. If you agree to this, the same will hold true in connection with the rules of invalidating testimonies, restrictive ordinances, indemnities, and settling feuds. But it will not hold true in respect to what falls under the quarter of the acts of worship, such as fasting and prayer, nor in respect to what the usages of life entail of civil and legal matters, such as determining the lawful and the unlawful. You should therefore know that what the jurisprudent comes nearest discussing under works which pertain to the hereafter are four: Islam, prayer, almsgiving, doing what is lawful, and abstaining from what is unlawful. But when you examine how far the jurisprudence speculation goes into these four, you will find that it does not go beyond the limits of this world into the next. If then you realize this limitation in respect to these four, it becomes to you more evident in others besides. So you see, the scholar of jurisprudence, they are mainly dealing with things of this world. So this is why Imam Al-Ghazali put the scholars of fiqh with the secular scholars, even though there are certain things which they discuss which are religious in nature. But he says their primary expertise is of the matters of this world, not of the next. That also is something to think about, given the precedents that many Muslims have placed upon jurisprudence in the past half century or so. Jurisprudence is one area of Islam. It is not the overall of Islam. Imam Al-Ghazali continues and says, concerning Islam, the jurisprudent discourses on what renders it sound or unsound, as well as on its conditions, but only pays attention to outward confession. The heart, however, is removed from his domain, because the apostle set apart from the jurisprudence those who wield the sword and those whose hand the reins of temporal power lie. This the apostle did when he said to the man who had killed another because the latter had recited the confession of faith, giving for a reason his fear of the sword, have you examined his heart? The jurisprudent also determines with the aid of the sword the soundness of one's Islam, although he knows that the sword can neither reveal to him the intentions of the individual nor remove from his heart the veil of ignorance and bewilderment. Jurisprudence is concerned with external. It's not concerned with the heart. It touches on it on a few places, but it's not specialized in that area. He is, however, a counselor to him who wields the sword, since the sword can reach the individual's neck and hand his possessions. Repeating the confession of faith with the tongue protects his life and possessions as long as he has either in this world. For this reason, the Prophet ﷺ said, I was ordered to fight people until they say there is no God but God. When they say this, they render their lives and possessions immune against my hand. He thus combined the efficacies of verbal confession to life and possessions. But in the hereafter, mere words do not avail. Only the illumination of hearts by divine light, their secret thoughts, and their sincerity do avail. These, however, do not fall within the field of jurisprudence, although the jurisprudent may delve into them, as he might also delve into theology and medicine, both of which are outside his field. You see what Imam Al-Ghazali is saying here. When you pass over to the next slide, just because you said something, it's not what Allah is looking for. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not looking at your outward actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at your heart, your intentions, what you sincerely try to do, even if you ended up doing the opposite. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking for. But the scholar of jurisprudence is looking at the outward stuff because they don't know that. They can't tell what's in your heart. Sometimes they can make an assessment of it, and sometimes that is necessary in a court case or something. But they cannot tell. Only Allah knows what's in the heart. And yet it is that which is most important. Concerning prayer, the jurisprudent is entitled to give his opinion as to whether or not it has been correctly performed in accordance with the prescribed regulations, regardless of the fact that the worshipper, from the beginning to the end, might not have paid attention to any part of his prayer except the magnificent takbir, but as instead busies himself in going over his market transactions. See, a person could be Allahu Akbar, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and while they're doing that, they might be thinking, oh gosh, did I pay my bill on time? Or did I pay that person? Or do I need to go and buy something? And actually, how many of us at some point during our prayers have done that very thing? Well, if that is what you're doing during the prayer, you're not really praying. But the person who studies fiqh, who studies jurisprudence, will look at you and say you performed your prayer correctly, because you put the hands in the correct places. You performed the correct outward movements, maybe even recited the correct words. But were you praying? Were you praying with your heart? Which is really what's required. This is what Allah requires of you. This is what is good for you. The person who studies jurisprudence can't assess that. They don't know. They can advise and say, well, if that was the case, then it doesn't really count, but they can't say any more than that. And that, just as I was saying, the Imam Al-Ghazali says such a prayer is of no use for the hereafter, just as a verbal confession of Islam is also of no use. Nevertheless, the jurisprudent does pass judgment regarding its soundness, namely whether or not the worshipper has, in what he has performed, fulfilled the requirements of the law, the religious law, and has thereby rendered himself immune to execution and punishment, which in some societies, that's what they used to do. To the subject of submitting and presenting the heart to God, however, both of which are works pertaining to the hereafter, and through which the works are rendered efficacious, The jurisprudent does not address himself, and in case he does, he oversteps his bounds. Concerning almsgiving, the jurisprudent examines what satisfies the demand of the magistrate, so that in effect the payment of alms is withheld and consequently the magistrate exacts it by force. The jurisprudent then rules that the responsibility of the magistrate has been fulfilled. It is related that Abu Yusuf, the judge, who is in the habit of giving away all his income to his wife at the end of the year, and in turn making her give away hers to him, in order to avoid the payment of zakat. On being informed of it, Abu Hanifa declared that that was the result of Abu Yusuf's versatility in jurisprudence. And Abu Hanifa was right, because such a thing is the result of worldly wisdom. Nevertheless, its harm in the hereafter outweighs every benefit it may yield in this world. Moreover, such knowledge is harmful. This is zakat is a tax within the Muslim state. Today it is paid as like an obligatory charity or tithe, but within a traditionally Muslim country, the zakat would have been paid like a tax by every Muslim. But that was only to go to those people within the society, be they Muslims or not, who were most in need. But nonetheless, when it was collected pretty much similar to how taxes are collected today. And just like that, you had people like this person, Abu Yusuf, who's mentioned here, who avoided the payment of tax by finding clever ways around it. And for sure, within this world, Imam Abu Hanifa, when he was told about this, he said, well, that's the result of that's the result of his versatility in jurisprudence. In other words, I can't say anything because according to fiqh, according to jurisprudence, there's nothing wrong with it. He's given all of his income away to his wife, and his wife gave all hers to him. They don't have, they've paid everything away. That they've actually, then they're not eligible to pay zakat, technically, within the jurisprudence. But in reality, they've done tax avoidance. And of course, today, that's what you get. You get people who do tax avoidance today. And obviously, what those taxes go on is a bit different because they cover all manner of things. But zakat is something which is required of every Muslim by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not by the state. The state may be fulfilling that, but it is required by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you don't pay your zakat, and you should pay your zakat, the consequences in the next life would be immense because it's part of your deen. But subhanAllah, there were people who got away with it by being clever, but did they really? Imam Al-Ghazali here is highlighting the shortcomings of jurisprudence and what Islam actually teaches, and how there's a difference between this. Concerning the lawful and the unlawful, abstinence from the latter part is part of religion. Piety, moreover, has 4 grades. The first is that piety, as taqwa, which is required for just testimony, and the relinquishing of which disqualifies man to bear witness before a court or to judge or to act as a governor. It consists, in other words, of avoiding all that is clearly unlawful. The second is that piety of an honest person, which guards against dubiousities, which engender ambiguous and misleading interpretations. So the Prophet ﷺ said, discard that which is dubious for that which is indubious, i.e. what's clear. He also said, sin is heart alluring. In other words, people's hearts are generally attracted to what is sinful. We should avoid things which are questionable for that which is clear. The third is the piety of the godly, which entails desisting from perfectly lawful deeds for fear that they may lead to deeds which are unlawful. In this connection, the Prophet ﷺ said, no person will be numbered among the godly unless they are ones to avoid what is harmless for fear of what is harmful. Of such is the reluctance to discuss the affairs of people, lest one be drawn into backbiting, and the abstinence from eating or drinking of things which whet the appetite, lest they should stimulate passion and lust, which lead men to commit that which is forbidden. The fourth is the piety of the saints, which shuns all things but God for fear of expending one single hour of life in things which, although it is clear and certain they will lead to nothing unlawful, do not help to bring the individual nearer to God. All these grades of piety except the first, namely the piety of witnesses and judges, as well as what militates against justice, are outside the domain of the jurisprudent. Furthermore, to comply with the requirements of the first grade of piety does not preclude sin being punished in the hereafter. The Prophet said to Wabisa, consult your own heart, although you have been given a dispensation once, twice, to thrice. The jurisprudent does not and should not express an opinion regarding the things which allure and perplex the heart, or how to deal with them, but confines his opinion to those things which militate against justice. Hence, the entire scope of the jurisprudence domain is limited to the affairs of this world, which pave the road to the hereafter. Should he then touch upon the attributes of the heart and the rules of the hereafter, he does so as an intruder, just as he would be whenever anything related to medicine, arithmetic, astronomy, and theology confronts him. The same is true of philosophy in relation to syntax or poetry. Sufyan al-Thawri, an authority in exoteric knowledge, used to say that the study of this science is not among the provisions for the hereafter. How could it be when it is agreed that the value of knowledge is acting according to his precepts? It is possible, therefore, to hold as provisions for the hereafter the knowledge of the forms that divorce might take, either zihar or by lian, of contracts involving immediate payments, of the purchase of admitting delay in the delivery of the article purchased, of hire, rental, lease, and of money changing. Anyone who acquires the knowledge of these things, hoping thereby to draw nearer to God, would certainly be mad. Indeed, nothing but engaging the body and soul in the service of God and in his worship would draw people nearer to God. And nobility lies in knowing how to accomplish these deeds. SubhanAllah. You know, so much knowledge here that we don't look into generally as a community. I'm not meaning as individuals, but as a community. I'm going to leave it there because, I mean, there's a lot of detail that we can discuss, but I think it's important that we study books like this and understand what our deen actually teaches. And I mean, Imam Al-Ghazali, he is regarded as the proof of Islam. He is a really highly ranked and highly respected scholar within Islam. And you can't go wrong by learning from someone like that and understanding what our deen actually teaches. And understand that a lot of what we're presented with today is actually to do with jurisprudence. It's not the real heart of Islam and what we need in order to get to the hereafter and have a good situation. Well, we get to the hereafter, but we'll have a good situation in the hereafter. Um, we're not going to get to paradise by understanding the minutiae of what is basically law. People who think that are, as Imam Al-Ghazali said, mad. They don't understand. And on that note, it's worth looking at Imam Al-Ghazali's life and how he was an amazing scholar of jurisprudence. And then he had a very difficult time because that's all he knew, and he knew something was missing. And then he looked into spirituality and he realized what it was that he was missing. See, if we just present our religion as jurisprudence, we're missing a huge ocean of what our religion really is about. What is its real focus and purpose, which is to save our souls. I hope you benefited from this, and I may move on to another book next week, or another part of the Ihya Ulum. I'm not too sure yet, because that goes into immense depth, and I'm not going to be able to go through that in Friday Reflections videos. But I wanted to give you a taste of it so that you could have some understanding of the depth of Islam and its many areas, its many facets, the many fields that you can study just within Islam itself. And also what Islam recommends that you should study that are really separate. I mean, things such as medicine, but it's always been, strongly advocated within Islam. So we need to have this understanding so that we can develop things properly within our communities and be constructive people within society and within the Muslim community. Not everybody has to be an expert in this, but you should at least have sort of some kind of a working knowledge, some kind of a general understanding. And I mean, I've been a Muslim for 22 years, and what I've seen is most Muslims generally lack this and only know some very basic points of Islam, which in many cases often just been passed on from their parents or community, but it's not really understanding Islam. It's not understanding what the Quran teaches. It's not understanding usul al-fiqh. It's not understanding too much of anything. Now, it's not surprising that we have problems within our Muslim communities when this is the understanding of Islam that many Muslims have. It's also not surprising that people can be led astray and be pulled into various groups which are up to no good or damaging for the community or society in general, when people lack the understanding of Islam which we need, like a general working understanding of Islam, which then they can pursue from there, whichever direction they want to go. But I mean, this is often not what's being taught. It's not what's being taught in madrasas. It's not what's being taught in a lot of mosques, when there's part-time madrasa classes that many mosques run. It's just not there in many cases. This is a huge problem, and we need to overcome it, because unless we do, we're not going to move on from the mess in which we find ourselves. If you find these videos useful and you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channels. I go live on Instagram and Facebook via Zoom every Monday and Friday to the best of my ability each week. And I wish you all a very good evening if you're in the UK, and a wonderful weekend. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May God's peace and blessings be with you all.